Hey, one more thing before you go. Are you curious about what it's like to work for the New York City Police Department? Or wonder what it was like to be at ground zero during 9/11? How would that experience shape your career? Have you ever wondered what really happens at a crime scene? Or is there a funny side to cop culture? In this episode, you're going to get insight into the camaraderie and the sense of purpose that comes with being part of the NYPD as we have a conversation with a retired detective. We're going to uncover the down and dirty about being a cop in the Big Apple. Stay tuned for this unique opportunity to learn the ins and outs of being on the beat in the city that never sleeps. I'm your host, Michael Hurst. Welcome to One More Thing Before You Go. My guest in this episode is Vic Ferrari. Great name, by the way. A retired 20-year member of the New York City Police Department and author of 6 books, including NYPD Through the Looking Glass, Stories from Inside America's Largest Police Department, the NYPD's Flying Circus, Cops, Crimes, and Chaos, and NYPD Law and Disorder, just to name a few. He shares his journey as a cop in New York City with remarkable attention to detail combined with a sarcastic flair. Vic exposes the good, the bad, and the ugly of America's largest police department. Welcome to the show, Vic.
Hey, Mike, thank you so much for having me on your show.
What an amazing career that you've had. As we talked before we come on here, most of my listener and viewers know that, I'm a retired police sergeant, but, I was just in Colorado. And although we were busy, I think you got a leg up on me on that area.
New York City is a 3-ring circus. I mean, it's a city that never sleeps, like you said earlier. I mean, you've got 9 million people packed into 5 boroughs. It's just nonstop action, and you can be as busy as you want.
Well, I think that the diversity that belongs into New York City. I mean, there are some questions. I told you I used to have a partner and a guy that worked underneath me when I was a sergeant. That was a New York City cop, and we had a lot of conversations. But there were some that I never got to ask him. So I would like to explore a little bit of that with you today, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Ask away.
First of all, where'd you grow up?
I'm born and raised in New York City. I lived in the borough of the Bronx for most of my adult life.
So now you said that the New York City is made up of 5 different boroughs.
Yeah, Bronx, Brooklyn, Staten Island, Queens, and Manhattan.
Now the boroughs, are they individual? When you say boroughs, just help me understand and help the listeners and viewers understand. A borough, is that like a county, or is that like a city, or is that like a suburb?
They're all counties.
All
But they're
counties.
all they're all counties. They all have a borough president, but they're all encompassed by City Hall in Manhattan, the mayor of New York.
From there. New York City Police Department, do you cover all of those? You either work a Brooklyn district or a Queens district or a Manhattan district, or do each one of those have their own law enforcement?
No, so the New York City Police Department encompasses all the 5 boroughs. There's 30,000 members, 30 to 35,000 members at any given time. There's 77 police stations or precincts
Wow.
distributed throughout the 5 boroughs. I mean, I worked in the Bronx the vast majority of my career. I know there's 12 in the Bronx. Manhattan, I think, has the most. Um, but they're all it's all each borough has what's called the borough, which is the central office, and they report to Police Plaza, which is in Lower Manhattan, or police headquarters.
So I mean, that must, what is that, like 30 or 40,000 cops?
Yeah, between 30 and 35. Well, not cops, but I mean, when I say members, I mean, yes, the vast majority is police officers, detectives, sergeants, lieutenants, and then you start going up to upper management.
Yeah, the upper management, the ones that sit and make all the rules and
Yeah, they're masters of the universe.
exactly, exactly. So what was your family like? I think you, in the information I got from you, you call yourself a survivor of an Irish father and an Italian mother. I'm familiar with the Italian side.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in the Bronx in the 70s and 80s, my neighborhood was Irish and Italian with a little bit of the mafia sprinkled in. And my parents were what was considered at the time a mixed marriage, because the Irish and the Italians didn't really play nice with each other, because you got to remember the Irish came to the United States first and they weren't treated well. Irish need not apply and the potato famine. Then the Irish started getting civil service jobs, and then there was basically the civil servants of New York City, and here come the Italians, and they weren't great fans of them. So you had a lot of static between the two ethnic groups. But then in the 1960s, they started putting their differences aside. And like I said in my one of my books, red hair and freckles married olive skin and swarthy, and I'm a product of that.
And a cop. So it works. You got a little bit of Irish, a little bit of Italian, and it works.
That was a big combination in my neighborhood. And I went to an all boys Catholic high school in the Bronx. And there were a lot of Catholic high schools back then. And my graduating class of 250 boys, 40, just my year, 40 went into the New York City Police Department.
Holy smokes.
So Catholic high schools were basically like produce cops and firemen the way Penn State produces linebackers for the NFL.
Yeah, that works too. I excuse me. I have heard that the two best jobs in New York City are cops and firefighters.
I don't know about cops. I definitely know the fire department because, the fire department, they had better schedule. Most of those guys, I mean, there are cops that own their own businesses or have side gigs, but the fire department, it was almost expected. And most of the firemen were in the trades, plumbers, electricians, and with their hours, I don't exactly remember what it was, but I mean, they're when there's not a fire, they're sleeping in the station house, and they're off for more time than we are.
Yeah.
So that enabled them, to run successful businesses out of their homes.
That's the way it was in Colorado. The firefighters got to work like 9 days a month because they worked 24-hour shifts and stayed in the fire department when they did it. So they worked 9 days a month and they had all this other time. We were always jealous of that. Although I loved it when they cooked because we got to go up there and they'll put out a call saying, hey, we have chow. And you could swing by and grab a great meal.
Yeah, we had that too. I mean, because in New York City, the precincts, I mean, have so many cops in them, and the busier the precinct, the more cops you have. So a small precinct like out in Staten Island with there's 3 precincts, you only have maybe 100 cops per precinct. But in Manhattan, like Manhattan North, Manhattan South, a larger precinct, you could have 400 or 500 people in there. Mm-hmm. So, or a busy precinct in the Bronx like the 4-4 or the 4-6, where they're turning out 30 cops a night. Everybody would kick in $5, and whoever was doing station house security or the TS operator would go out and get supplies, and they'd make chili. Or, I mean, we used to do that too, but I know what you mean. Like, I know a lot of the cops that would get a foot post somewhere in the middle of nowhere. If there was a fire, they'd kick up a couple of bucks and go to the firehouse to chill out and get something to eat.
Yeah, it always worked. It was always a good night during those time periods. Excuse me. I'm just getting over a chest cold, so please forgive my cough.
No problem.
It's not always conducive of having a conversation, but so you when did you get interested in law enforcement? Can I ask?
Yeah, I knew what I wanted to do when I was 5 years old. I knew I wanted to be a police officer and a New York City police detective. I mean, growing up in the 70s and 80s in New York, it was all cop shows, and most of them were about the New York City Police Department. Around the corner from the movie theater, the local movie theater, was a precinct. So my mom used to take me when I was a little boy. I was fascinated with the police cars. I'd watch how the cops interacted in front of the station house, the way they'd lean back with their hand on the butt of their gun. And then by age 10, my friends and I used to sneak into the post office and steal FBI wanted posters off the wall and run around the neighborhood trying to find fugitives in the local deli or the bank. So I knew what I wanted to do. I mean, my parents thought I was out of my mind. They always were trying to get me into the trades, be a plumber, an electrician, or go to college, but wasn't interested. And by 20, I took the police exam. And by 21, I was in the police academy.
Yeah, I think that people always ask me that question as well, as I had to ask you. They always say, why do you want to be a cop? Especially nowadays, because the copping has changed quite a bit with the perception of the public and how they're interacting with cops. But when I was a cop, when I wanted to be a cop, I grew up in a dysfunctional family, and I had 2 alcoholic parents, and the cops were called a lot to the house. So when they'd show up, it always fascinated me because they'd come over there, they'd calm things down, they separate my parents, they'd take care of the situation, so to speak. And, I kind of grew up in that environment. So I kind of went, yeah, I think I want to do that for a living. That's where mine came from. I thought, maybe I can contribute back as they did. when I was growing up, and that I was fascinated with how they did that. And I had a few of them that took me out to the police car and then got to sit in the front seat and flip the lights and play with the siren. I thought, this is what I think I want to do. And I did the same thing after I got out of high school. Um, I went to college immediately for criminal justice and started learning criminal justice from that perspective. I don't know what it is in New York. I'm assuming you have to be 21 in New York.
I think it's 20 now.
20 now. Colorado, you have to be 21 to be a cop. So I did university for college for a couple of years. And then I worked for like Wells Fargo and cooked and busboy and dishwasher, you name it, up until I had the time to be able to take the police exam. And kind of took the same route from that perspective. But getting into it, loved it from the minute that I started it. It was, other than working graveyard shifts, that was kind of, for a while, it was I didn't like that, but eventually I learned to like working midnight or swing shift into graveyard shift, and that seemed to be the best hours. You can take a mid shift and come in the middle of a swing shift and go home like about 4 o'clock in the morning, which worked out perfectly because you got all the action, you got all the business, and then you go home and get to sleep a little bit normal.
Yeah, growing up in the Bronx was like a criminal justice immersion course. I mean, I saw crime all the time. And I mean, I lived in a halfway decent neighborhood, but you just saw things
Yeah.
constantly. I mean, I remember as a boy, like 6 or 7 years old, we lived right off the Cross Bronx Expressway. And I remember a guy walked past our house, and a couple of minutes later, he comes running down the block with a case of beer over his shoulder. And I hear, "Stop, stop." And the guy tried running across 8 lanes of highway, the Cross Bronx Expressway, and he got blasted by a car, and beer all over the place, killed him. And I remember my father telling me, "All right, go inside." My father said something funny like, "Well, he's never going to do that again. Just go inside." So, I saw a lot of things as an early age. And then to touch upon what you said about the different shifts of being a cop. I don't know how it is in Colorado, but in New York, when I first started, we had what was called the 9 squad chart. So you would do 8 to 4, a week of 8 to 4s, 4 to 12s, 8 to 4, 4 to 12, 4 to 12, midnight, rinse and repeat. And then and I think it was probably the worst thing the NYPD ever did was around the early 90s, they went to steady tours. And what they did was they created 3 different police departments within the police department. And like in the New York City Police Department, and I'm not trying to paint all cops in New York with the same brush, but I mean, everybody knows this. The day shift is usually the lazy people or the people that work side gigs. And those are the report takers. They're not looking, it's usually the older people, it's the older veterans, and they'll show up at a burglary call a couple of minutes late. They'll take the report. They're not looking to set the world on fire. 4 to 12s is the kids. That's where in New York, there's just so much action on the 4 to 12s. That's where they throw the rookies, and you're racing around answering 30, 40 jobs a night. You're eating in the police car. You really don't have time sometimes to take your meal hour, and you'll learn. It's on the job training. It's baptism by fire. And then the midnight shift, I like to call for crime, and that's big game hunting, because as my father used to say, and probably a lot of fathers used to say, anything after 11 o'clock, there's nothing good going on. And what do you have after 11 o'clock at night driving around? Cops, cabs, and drunks, and bad people looking to do something. So that's usually when, these horrific crimes take place, or cops are walking into the station house with Uzis. There's all sorts of stuff going on. So, but what the NYPD did was when they went to these shifts, it broke up the camaraderie in the department, because you had guys working in a station house that didn't, you worked a day shift. You might have seen a guy's name tag that did 4 to 12s. And unless you guys aren't using the same car every day, like you're handing him or her your keys, you don't even know these people. So they're really, information really didn't get exchanged. Patterns really weren't discussed because you had 3 different shifts going.
That's kind of what we did in Colorado. I worked for two different departments in Colorado. One was a sheriff's department, and then one was a police department. And pretty much the same thing. The only difference would be that we ran 3-month shifts. So you do day shift for 3 months, a swing shift for 3 months, and then mids for 3 months. And then they had another shift that was kind of an overlapping that went from like a 6, 7 in the evening and it ran till like 4 in the morning the next morning, and that was kind of a cover shift, yeah, especially during the summertime. And that's the one that I like doing the most because I got a little bit of the swing shift, I got a little bit of the tag and bag on the midnight shift, and then still was able to go home and get some decent rest, before it started all over again. But then they started rotating every 3 months, and that was a pain in the ass, like major pain in the ass. Went back to the same thing. I mean, we pretty much knew each other because our departments weren't as large as the NYPD, so you would be familiar with everybody, but it was still kind of every 3 months you kind of have to readjust to the shift again, which was really not cool from
Yeah.
that perspective.
In,
Um,
in Oh, so in New York, like in the precinct, you had specialized units like that would overlap, like an anti-crime team, which I worked in for a while, which is plainclothes. We would do 6 at night till 2 in the morning, or 10 in the morning till 6 at night. So we would overlap with the shift changes in case the bad guys figured out, well, there's going to be that 3 to 10 minutes we can pull something off because the cops are going to be handing each other keys and gassing up their
mhm,
vehicles and no one's minding the store. Also, every borough has what's called a task force unit, which can be up to 300 cops, and they're citywide in marked uniform cars. And those guys, same thing, 6 at night till 2 in the morning. I mean, the hours might have changed, but they're definitely
mhm.
there to make sure, if something goes down, you still have radio cars out there that'll respond.
Now, did you from yeah, I mean, most of the time when we watch TV, the majority of what we see on TV, and I'm just trying to help our viewers understand, the majority of what we see on TV through these cop shows, especially New York cops, most of them are walking a beat. So, do the majority of cops walk a beat in New York City, or is it a combination between patrol cars and walking a beat?
It depends on the precinct. So, all right. So, when you're a rookie cop, when you come, well, things have changed. But when I got hired, I went into a field training unit in the South Bronx, and I covered about 3 or 4 different precincts. And every day you would get a foot post. So they would sprinkle the rookies around the South Bronx. And twice a day, a sergeant would pull up with a driver. He'd ask to see your book. He'd give you a scratch. And, if you had any questions, he'd try to answer them for you. When you got to a precinct, yes, they had foot posts, but a lot of times that depended on what was going on with the vehicles or if you had a partner. A lot of times when you're the rookie cop or, NYPD, a precinct might get like 15 or 20 rookies after a graduating class from the police academy. Well, there's not enough cars to go around, or some commands, rightfully so, they don't want to put rookies together immediately. They want to put them with a seasoned veteran. If there's not veterans working, they put them on foot somewhere, and they usually put them, unless you screw up and they're going to punish you and put you in the middle of nowhere, they're going to put you in a high crime area where they're dealing drugs, or they might put you in a shopping area to deter shoplifting. And of course, they want their parking tickets, so they want you out there writing tickets and moving traffic along. But you learn a lot on a foot post. I mean, and every rookie cop eventually wants to get out of the weather and jump into a radio car. And I didn't want to be on a foot post, but a lot of times I think back and I think that was probably some of the best experience I gained by being out there by myself and being on foot and knowing how to hide myself in plain view. And you learn a lot of things while you're on foot.
That's interesting because that's how I learned how to do a walkabout. Was from Richie Kleiner. I told you about that guy that was a New York City sergeant that came onto our department, and he got me into parking the car and doing a walkabout and walking downtown and walking in the stores and talking to people, sitting on the bench, kind of observing and that kind of a thing. And I uh, I continued to do that throughout my career before I retired. That was a really integral part of my career. I enjoyed doing that. I like talking to the people, the shop owners, getting to know them a little bit more, which helped me. And like you were just saying, it helped me because I understood a little bit more if I was driving down there and if something looked out of the ordinary, it was easier for me to tell because I had been in that shop walking a beat instead of just driving around. I think it's a benefit, from my experience, although I think it's a benefit that we have the opportunity to do that as a cop. How long were you on FTO?
Field train. So the police academy, I mean, things have changed, but when I got hired in '87, the police academy was 6 months. It was 6 months of field training. And like I said, you either were on a foot post or every now and then you would jump in a car with a sergeant and he would handle all the shitty jobs because they wanted you to get the experience. So a DOA call, you were going on that. A suicide, you were going on that. I mean, just the things that every uniform cop really doesn't want to deal with, you would get that. But going back to what we were talking about with the foot post, so you learn, like I said, you learned a lot of things you would never learn in a car. So say you've got a foot post and there's a bunch of guys dealing drugs in front of a bodega or on a corner, right? While you're out there, they're not going to deal drugs in front of you, but eventually someone's going to go on the roof and they're going to throw airmail at you to chase you off the corner. So you got to figure out, all right, how am I going to catch these guys? And I'm in uniform. But you learn, you figure things out. So what you do is you flag down an ambulance a couple of blocks away, and you sit in the back of an ambulance and you watch them deal drugs for 20 minutes. And then you just kind of walk up to the corner and they think you just walked up there. You didn't see what's going on. And you know that the brown paper bag with the crack is behind this license plate. And this guy just pitched to about 15 people. Or you flag down a gypsy cab with tinted windows. You take your hat off and you sit, or you go on a roof, take your hat off with binoculars, you cover your shield, or you take your jacket off so they can't see it. So there was a lot of tricks that you learn. It's like, well, I can stand out here like a wooden Indian in a cigar store, or I can start making some arrests and get these clowns off this corner. So you learn to become inventive.
Yeah, it works. That's brilliant. What a great opportunity. As a cop, what a great opportunity. Because, well, when we all start, we want to go out and catch as many bad guys as we can. I miss catching bad guys, actually. How long have you been retired?
I got out, it's going to be 16 years now.
16 years. I'm working on 22 now. We just gave away our age, Vic.
I
I
just
think,
turned 57 and I'm not too happy about it, but there's not really much I can do about it.
as we know, life can change in an instant. So I guess turning 57 is a positive thing because the alternative would kind of suck. I just
And
turned 63.
you look good for 63.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Could you write me a note so I can give that to my wife? Please. Um, let's talk. Let's talk. You want to swap some stories?
Sure. What do you want to hear?
Well, what's the strangest thing that you ever encountered? One of your most strangest calls?
You know, in New York, there's just so much going on. I mean, I've walked into a couple of homicides that were fresh, just happened. One, the killer was still in the room. Another time, a guy was just finished decapitating a woman, and two of my coworkers shot him through a window and knocked him back into an apartment. Um, I've walked in on old people having sex in a short stay motel. And that's what my books are about. They're short stories of the wild things that happen. Um, and it's not just limited to creative criminals or emotionally disturbed people. Some of the cops I worked with were like real characters that, you would just believe that they were members of the New York City Police Department. They had interesting side careers. I worked with two guys in their spare time. They were funeral directors and morticians, and I'm like, you don't get enough of that shit here.
Yeah, no kidding. Holy crap!
Yeah, there was another guy that owned a bagel place. We used to call him Bobby Bagels. He looked like a burnt bialy. It just, you got to throw me in a direction. You point me in a direction, and I
Well,
can give you a story.
I'll give you one of mine. We got a call that this guy was screaming and yelling and it was like a domestic, and the neighbors were saying that there was just unholy yelling and screaming coming out of this guy's apartment. We couldn't get him to answer the door. Just tell him, he kept yelling at us, "Get the fuck away from me! Get the fuck away from me! Stay away from me! Go away from the door!" Blah 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 blah. Then he said, "I have a gun," so that changed the game just a little bit. So we got a peek into the window, and when we peeked into the window, he's in the middle of the floor. He's buck ass naked, and he is literally having sex with a fish. With a fish. So obviously, we kicked the door about that time because he's a little off and things weren't
Yeah.
going right. And he said, "What are you going to do with my girlfriend?" And we said, "Where is your girlfriend?" And he said, "Right there." And he points to the fish on the floor. That is the most bizarre case that I ever walked in on.
What kind of fish?
I think it was a trout. What kind of fish?
Trout. All right, so I'll tell you the story. So my partner and I, one night, 4 to 12, we get called out to a short stay motel in the Bronx. It's where people meet because they can't normally meet in public due to marital obligations. The dump. Sheets are extra. And we get called out there, comes over as, loud noises, calls for help. We go up there. I got my nightstick in my hand. I'm just about to pound on the door, and I hear a woman's voice scream, "Be a man and put it in my ass." And my partner and I just look at each other, and we can't stop laughing. I mean, we're like idiot children. We just can't stop laughing, right? So my partner goes, "Let's get the fuck out of here." I said, "No, oh no." I says, "Come on." I says, "What if someone is like, it's an episode of Pulp Fiction in there and someone's in a gimp box?" I says, "We fucking leave and someone's in here getting fucked over." I says, "We're going to get screwed." So I start pounding on the door, and then you hear a woman's voice yell. I heard, what did she say? "I told you you're making too much noise." So we start laughing again. Door opens, and there's this little old man. He looked like Albert Einstein with crazy hair. He's wearing a pair of boxer shorts, and his testicles are hanging way past his boxer shorts. And I go, "Hey, Pop, I'm sorry to bother you." I says, "Can we come in for a minute?" He goes, "Well, what's wrong?" I says, "Well, you're making a lot of noise in there, and we want to make sure everything's all right." He goes, I guess. So he lets us in. Granny's laying in the bed with the comforter up to her nose. I just walk through I wasn't there to break their balls. I just walk around. I check the bathroom to make sure no one was hiding with a 2x4. And I says, "All right, carry on, no problem." And as we're leaving, my partner, who's a smart ass, turns to the old lady, goes, "Did he put it in your ass?" And the old lady goes, "Wouldn't you like to know?" And then we started laughing again, and we walked out of the motel. But I mean, here's two people in their 80s. Like they didn't
Wow.
have they didn't have so they had to have been married. But I just thought that what great lengths a pair of 80-year-olds would go to have sex.
That's amazing. 80 years old. 88. Wow. I've not seen that. I haven't seen that. Um, it is, I find it interesting that, how do I explain this when I explain this? Cops see the worst in people and they
Oh
see the
yeah,
best people at their worst.
yeah,
No matter what, you and everybody at some point and another, as you know, you could be rich, you could be poor, you could be black, white, Asian, doesn't matter. That at some point in your life, whatever contact you have with a cop, you're either a victim or you're a criminal. 90% of the time, any kind of negative contact, you're either a victim or you're a criminal. In regard to that, I have found that the majority of people, and I'm sure the same thing, you probably amplifies in New York City. The majority of people really um, give us a run for our money, so to speak, in regard to how they can act, what they do.
I think I know what you mean. As far as you see the best and the worst of people, and there are times where as a police officer or a detective, you're trying to mediate something, right? You're not going in there to lock somebody up. Sometimes you're actually there to save someone or from themselves, and you try talking to someone and you try explaining something to them, and you're giving them a million and one chances for them to back out of something or de-escalate something. And like you said, there's no talking to them. They're going to proceed, and sometimes that can end in their demise. Sometimes that can end in them being arrested. And I like to tell people that haven't worked in law enforcement, I said, cops are just civil servants.
Yeah.
They have jobs and families and problems like everybody else. They want to come into work, do their shift, and go home. No one's no one, this isn't like the 1950s in the deep south where you didn't get along with the sheriff and he left you in a ditch at the end of town. It's the world's changed, technology's changed. That doesn't go on anymore, and it hasn't gone on for 50 years. But some people are hung up in the past about that stuff, and just kind of like to beat that drum.
The In your career, in your early part of your career, when did you become a detective? Did you start? I mean, what's the process? I should ask you. What is the process of becoming a detective at NYPD? And did you choose which division you wanted to try to go for?
In New York, you have to work in an investigative unit for 18 months. And if you get good evaluations and everything is fine, you pass a round robin, which is a background check, you're promoted to detective. And detective is a lateral move. So it's not like you get to tell a cop. You have no power. You're not telling cops what to do. You make about $3,500 more, and there's a little bit of you work a little less hours, but you get less vacation time. As far as working in my desired unit, I thought originally early in my career, with 5 years on the job, I put in for the narcotics division because I thought I'd really enjoy it. At first, I did. But in New York, I mean, drugs, we're talking about the early 90s during the crack epidemic, they wanted
Mhm.
numbers. And we were doing buy and bust like 3, 4 days a week. And you're going
Wow.
out with a field team arresting 10, 15 people, you're mass processing an arrest. And New York isn't like other places where you just fill out some paperwork and drop the person off. You got to get online at central booking and you can be there for hours with this person.
Mhm.
You got to go to grand jury that week. And in New York, we were locking up, I mean, the dregs of society because street people are the ones that are dealing drugs. It's not the kingpins that are dealing drugs. They use junkies to push their product. So if you're a heroin addict or a crackhead, you're selling 10 vials of crack or 10 decks of heroin for a vial or a deck to support your habit. So then we would lock these people up and they had hepatitis C and AIDS and they were always sick because they're living outdoors and they're always coughing on you. I always had a cold. And I said, you know what? After 14 months of this, I said, I want out of here. I'm going back to patrol. And so many people try to talk me out of it. And I said, look, I don't care. I'm miserable here. I don't want to do this shit no more. I went back to a precinct and I was always a car guy. I grew up in a neighborhood that had more car thieves per capita than in probably anywhere in the world. And so I always knew what to look for. I was always getting into car chases on patrol. I made a lot of stolen car arrests. I caught the detention of the NYPD's auto crime division. And I was lucky because my old sergeant from narcotics who liked me a couple of years down the road was working in the auto crime division. So when I put in my application, he got me in there and I had a wonderful 20-year career. The auto crime division, anything with chop shops, exporting stolen vehicles out of the country, changing VIN numbers on vehicles, on stolen vehicles for resale, identity theft, a lot of mafia cases
Mhm.
because New York City is so large. In the 90s, we were averaging over 150,000 stolen vehicles a year. So it was like shooting
Holy
fish in
crap.
a barrel.
That's
Yeah. So,
amazing. I mean, I told you I used to work with a Colorado auto theft investigator team, and it was a statewide thing, and we worked in regions there, and we were nowhere near that. I mean, we did a lot of car thefts, but wow, that's crazy.
oh, and we like like there's straight hits where you run a plate, it comes back stolen, and you go in, you try to lock the guy up. But my specialty was tag jobs where they would change VIN numbers on cars for resale. So, and I was quite good with GM products, Fords, Dodge, BMWs, Volkswagens, where they would steal a car, take all the VIN numbers off it, buy a salvage vehicle for pennies on the dollar, take all those VIN numbers off a wrecked car, put it on a stolen car, bounce the title out of state to wash the title, and then re-register the vehicle.
Wow, yeah, that and you did that for 10 years before you retired?
Yeah.
'Cause that's a long time to be doing that. The, did you, in the process of all of that, I think I told you, before we started this interview, most of ours were they were chopping and they were selling and they were doing the VIN switches and everything, but it was all going most of what we were doing was going to Mexico. Nothing really was going out of the country, like overseas out of the country. So you did quite a bit of that actually?
Exporting stolen vehicles out of the country?
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
like, to overseas?
oh yeah, and there were different ethnic groups doing it. We worked on a case where we had guys from Antigua that was shipping a couple of stolen cars a month in a shipping container out of the Bronx to Antigua. Jamaica, our Queens office did a case where they were shipping motorcycles to Hungary. The biggest case I worked on where we had Chinese nationals in Brooklyn and they were shipping 30 stolen Audi A6s a month to Shanghai. So you
Wow.
had this Chinese military intelligence officer, supposedly retired, and he hooked up with a Jamaican middleman in the Bronx. The Jamaican knew all these steel guys, and they were stealing 30 Audis a month. They
That's
would park them in
crazy.
the street. They'd let them cool off to make sure they didn't have low jack or GPS. They'd bring a couple at a time in the morning, during rush hour. No one's paying attention. They'd drive 2, 3 of these stolen cars into this. It was a large warehouse out in Brooklyn. Inside, you had Chinese nationals working, and 2 stolen Audis would go in a shipping container. They would let the air out of the tires so the vehicle would sit lower. They'd build a wooden frame above it, and then they would hoist 1 or 2 other cars in the shipping container so they could get 3 to 4 stolen vehicles per shipping container. From there, they had a phony bill of lading printed out, make it. I think it was under the guise it was a toy factory, if memory serves me correctly. They would have a trucking company come who didn't know anything that was going on, truck the container with 3 or 4 stolen Audis out to Newark, New Jersey. They would put on trains, railed across the United States. They would get put on shipping containers in Long Beach, California, where they were shipped to Shanghai. And this was going on for years
That's
until
crazy.
they got greedy. I'm sure it started with 10 or 15. And then before you knew it, it was almost like Audis were becoming extinct. And it got so big that they were hitting car dealerships over the weekend. So we were losing like 10 Audis at a time. And we knew they were being shipped because they weren't turning up anywhere. Usually cars are getting stolen, the bones are turning up. A kid gets grabbed in a Honda Accord, or you find a shell of a car somewhere. These things were just like UFOs had abducted them, not a trace.
Disappearing.
Yeah, and this guy got collared in the Palisades Mall stealing a BMW. You would think that he ventured out and was stealing besides what he was supposed to be stealing. He got grabbed up in Rockland County, and he started spilling his guts. And we did a joint case with the Westchester County District Attorney's Office with Janine Pirro when she was the DA up there. And we were on multiple wiretaps. We had, because in the NYPD, you have so many cops. We had Chinese cops that could speak Mandarin and Cantonese. So they were monitoring the Asian wiretaps. We had Spanish detectives monitoring the car thieves' wiretaps. And in the process of this international car theft ring, we realized that these guys were in the murder for hire business. So they were talking about whacking this guy, and I'll whack you like I whacked that guy in Connecticut. So when we took that case down, we solved between 13 and 15 homicides because these guys were also killing people, right? And one of the main car thieves was also the getaway driver. To our knowledge, he never pulled the trigger in any of these homicides, but he was always willing to drive for a couple of bucks. So we said, listen, we know you're involved in these homicides. You better start talking. And he did, and laid out chapter and verse, and it wasn't just one guy. It was a couple of guys that had done murders.
Well, that's crazy. I mean, what a career. I mean, I think that kudos, congratulations for that. I think that it's always a really good feeling when you bag and tag people like that. I think that it creates, at least within myself, I didn't do anything like that, but I did have the honor of arresting 2 of America's Most Wanted in my career.
Oh, cool.
And, yeah, that was pretty. I enjoyed that. Both of them, actually, I was working a task force when we grabbed them, and when we found out that they were both listed on America's Most Wanted, it was kind of like, yes, feather in my cap. I really enjoyed that.
Same time, or
separate, 2 different times. They were about 6 months apart.
What are their names?
Oh, I'm going to have to email those to you, Vic, to be honest with you, because I've been retired for 22 years, and that was about 3 years before I retired. So that's 25 years ago.
I used to watch that show all the time. So I'd be interested in who they were. There was a kid from my neighborhood that was a car thief that was actually on America's Most Wanted.
No kidding.
And he did jail time. Like, he was on the run for years. He was a car thief / burglar, did time. And about the mid 90s, my old partner and I pulled him over in an area where they conducive of dropping off stolen cars. And like, what the fuck are you doing down here? And he goes, listen, I did my time. I'm not doing shit anymore, which wasn't true because we had informants that were telling us that, yeah, he was still stealing.
Yeah, it's always, this is like 2 beers. How much you have to drink? 2 beers. Always 2 beers. Right. You're doing this again? Nope.
But he wasn't a fugitive anymore. He had, served federal and state time, and he was out. And then eventually he went back.
Yeah, the first individual actually had kidnapped a 13-year-old and was traveling across the country with her, and she had contacted her mother and had said that the guy was in the shower and said that we're here at this motel, and he's in the shower right now, and I'm not sure what to do, but I'm starting to like this guy, so I don't know if I'm coming home. And the mother contacted the FBI. The FBI contacted us and said, he's in your area. They're supposed to be at this motel. And we set up a little sting. We borrowed Domino's. I'm going to give away some secrets here. We borrowed Domino's pizza delivery, when they used to I don't know if they did it in New York or not, but they used to put
Yep.
these little things on top of their car, and then jacket and hat. And we walked up behind this guy's car, took another car, beat up piece of shit car, and then put it right up next to this guy's bumper. Like the delivery guy hit the car. And it's like, no, man, you got to come out, you know. And I'm not coming out. Fuck it, it's just my car. I don't care. He's going, yeah, but I care because my boss is going to kill me. This is his car, and blah 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 blah. Played the whole game, and as soon as he popped out the door, we snatched his ass, and it was kind of pretty. It was good.
Did he have a gun?
I'm sorry.
Was he armed? Did he have a gun?
When he came out the door, he was not armed. We did find 2 weapons
Yeah.
inside the motel room. We
Had
did
he
find 2
known,
weapons in there.
yeah, had he known the cops were out there, probably would have ended a lot differently.
Oh, I'm sure it would have. And then the other guy, actually, this was unfortunate for the lady, but this guy was a serial rapist. He had escaped prison out of New Mexico, and he happened to be walking downtown, and one of his victims passed him, and she kind of started trembling and freaked out because he was like nasty ass. He would kidnap them. He would hold them for 3, 4, 5 days, sexually assault them repeatedly, and he'd killed a couple, and then other ones he had just let go in the middle of nowhere, and she happened to be one of the ones that let go in the middle of nowhere. So her boyfriend, or I don't know if it's her boyfriend or fiance, whatever it was, she had totally just fell apart. And he called the cops and said, "Yeah, he's here, and this is who he is." So we contacted and verified that he was on the most wanted list, and we figured out where he was, and then we just kind of basically switched into plain clothes, and then surrounded him where he was, and kind of just kicked steps in until we cornered his ass, and he was caught him by himself and tagged his ass too. And it was, again, one of the feathers in my cap. I really enjoyed doing that. It was pretty cool. Made the
So,
newspapers in New Mexico, made the newspapers in Colorado. It was nice.
that's a great call. And those short stay motels, man, they're a cupboard of crime, aren't they?
They
I
are.
mean, you never know what you're going to get in a stolen cars or
Yep.
fugitives or drug deals.
Drugs.
It's not just short stay. There's something going on.
If people knew really what took place in these little motels, they
Oh,
wouldn't be coming to those little motels.
especially right off the interstate,
Yeah.
fugitive, all sorts of shit.
We've had suicides. My first call ever, my first official call ever on the job was a suicide. And it was a suicide at a motel. And it, unfortunately, it led me into a lot more suicides after that because it wasn't like an introduction to my law enforcement career. Here you go, here's the dead body. Um, I did not go into homicide investigation at that time, but as a patrol officer, I ran into a lot of suicides and homicides and things like this. But my first call ever was that, and it was at a motel. And then after that, so many unattended deaths, drownings in the hot tubs, and shootings inside the motel. A guy had a domestic violence we went to with a guy literally got his finger shot off, half his hand shot off, because the girl pointed the gun at him and he stuck his finger in the end of the barrel and said, "You're not going to pull the trigger." She went, "Yes, I am," and pulled the trigger and shot half his hand off.
Fucking idiot.
Um, and this was in another motel. So yeah, you're right. It's motels. I don't stay in motels. I
Yeah,
don't stay in
well, I
motels.
mean, you get what you pay for in a motel or a hotel. It's funny. The first DOA I got stuck with as a rookie cop, a guy killed another guy with a car door. There was a guy working on his car outside, and he got into an argument with the neighbor, and he leaned into the car. The guy came back and took the car door and slammed the guy's head in it.
Wow.
The guy, I mean, this is just how the Bronx operates, right? The guy was fucked up, right? His head blew up. He goes up into it, makes his way after a couple of minutes, makes his way. I'll never forget. It was a big foot of concrete steps, made his way up into the house, got a gun, gets a gun, right? And before he can go downstairs, collapses and drops dead on top of the coffee table. The detectives figured this out, but I mean, as a rookie cop, you're just
Wow.
called, and the detectives start asking questions downstairs, and yeah, well, Hector hit him in the head when he was working on the car and slammed it. So we figured out They got into an argument. The guy slammed his head in the car door. The guy went upstairs to get a gun to come down and shoot his ass, and then collapsed over the car, had a brain hemorrhage, I think it
Well,
was, and dropped dead.
people, don't you love them?
My life's a lot more peaceful now.
Yeah, I have learned that. Although after I retired, um, I really, because I was fortunate in a position to retire, I really did too many phone calls by calling shit in. I would call stuff in, call stuff in. Pretty soon, guys were going, "Hey, Sarge, you're working harder than when you were on the job, and you just need to go home and relax." Because I just kept calling in too much stuff. I missed the action. I missed doing it. It was, um, well, like you said in one of your books, Three Wing Circus.
Yeah, and
It is.
and 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 when that merry-go-round stops, like I always say, the NYP, a 20-year career with the NYPD is a merry-go-round. And once it stops, you get off. You got to kind of find your place in life
Yeah.
because it's still going on without you. And people ask me, "Do you miss it?" I miss the camaraderie and I miss the action. I'd love right now if I could get into a car chase, but I can't do that anymore. I'm in my mid 50s. I can't run anymore. My reflexes aren't what they were. I know that. So I'd wind up getting myself hurt. I mean, the closest thing of the action and adrenaline rush I get is playing softball one night a week. That's about it. But no, nothing can replace that for me. But and that's why I got into writing, because now I can live vicariously through myself.
Through your book.
I can write, I can remember these stories and I could tell these stories again. And people like you were nice enough to put me on their platforms. And it keeps my finger, on the pulse a little bit.
Now, had you ever dreamed about being an author before? What gave you what ignited that?
Bored out of my mind. I retired from the NYPD. I came to Florida. I became a cop in Florida. I hated it. It was a lot different. Re-retired, and friends and family said, "You got all these stories. You've had a wonderful career. You should start writing about these things." And I said, "All right, let me see if I can pull this off." And I wrote one NYPD book. You got it up on the screen, NYPD to the Looking Glass. That started selling, and before you knew it, I've written 6 books, 4 of which are NYPD themed.
Now, had you ever written like that before? I mean, other than reports, had you written anything before that? Before you decided to write a book?
No, no. I just all my books are just short stories. I can't write in chronological order. So I'll have a chapter with a theme, embarrassing moments. There's embarrassing moments that happened to me in my NYPD career, or police corruption. I'll have a chapter called Crossing Over the Dark Side, and I'll explain how the department looks at corruption and cops that I knew, or famous stories about cops that went bad. Or Practical Jokers is a chapter in another one of my books about the shit that goes on in the locker room and cops pulling pranks on each other. I try to give the readers a behind the scenes look into the NYPD that you wouldn't normally know. You know what I mean? It takes you backstage that television and movies and documentaries, things you just don't get to see.
Yeah, that's a brilliant. I mean, I have downloaded several of the books, and I plan on reading them. I haven't had the opportunity before this conversation, but I love your titles, and I love what they. I'm looking forward to what's inside each one of those books. I think that sharing those kind of stories is a wonderful opportunity to, like you said, live vicariously from what you used to do. I can relate to that. I miss that. I think that there are too many cops that retire, and then unfortunately, they don't last very long after they retire because they just don't know what to do with themselves anymore. Because as you know, being a cop is like who. It's not just what we are; it's who we are.
Yeah.
You know,
It's a lifestyle.
it's a
It
lifestyle.
definitely is. Like the mobsters call it the life. It's the same thing in law enforcement, because you've got to live your
Yeah.
life a different way. You know what I mean? In law enforcement, you've got to, or you should live your life on the straight and narrow. You can't get DUIs. You can't get locked up for domestic violence. You can't steal cable. You know what I mean? You've got to live the life of an altar boy. And once you retire, you've got all this knowledge, and it's very target specific. That doesn't really, unless you want to go into like a security gig, which that really wasn't for me. I just had no
Neither.
interest in it. You got to figure out what you're going to do with yourself, or you're going to die on the vine. And you're right. I remember them telling us that when I got hired 36 years ago, that the average cop lived to be 55 years old and died within 5 years. So, what was that movie, The Shawshank Redemption? Get busy
Yeah,
living or get busy dying. I mean,
yeah,
you've got to figure something out. And you've got a lot of great stories. And I think you should write a book because, I mean, you just told two good stories. And I hope you email me with those guys' names because I'm interested in the story. And there's such a big demand for true crime and true
mhm.
crime stories and cops. I mean, you put on TV, Blue Bloods, Chicago PD, people are dying for this stuff.
Yeah, the rookie
Who,
view,
who are we
SWAT.
to deny?
The rookie, SWAT, uh, Blue Bloods, yeah, you name it, and I live vicariously through some of those. Although it irritates my wife because I'd be going, they wouldn't do that,
Right.
or why didn't they do this, or they should have done that. But now she's kind of used to it, and she starts doing the same thing. So I've kind of
Yeah, she just tunes
incorporated
you
it.
out, or now, right? Or now she knows the job.
Yeah, she kind of goes, she goes, they wouldn't do that, would they? No, I don't think they would do that. It's like, no, they wouldn't do that. What's it like on a crime scene? Let's help our listeners and viewers understand when you walk into a crime scene. Let's say a homicide.
Well, in New York, so you've got so many specialized units in the NYPD, right? Like in a smaller police department, I'm sure. Well, I know this to be true because I worked for a small police department for a short time. You do a lot more. But like in New York, I walked into a homicide one time. My partner and I, we thought it was a cardiac. We go up into this 6-story walk up. There's a dead woman on the floor covered in blood. Her son's on top of her crying, mama, mama, mama. The apartment's been ransacked. So we tell him to get off his mother. We put him on the couch. And I get on the radio. I ask for the sergeant. I ask for PDU, which is Precinct Detective Unit. I call a bus, which is an ambulance. Even though it's obvious the woman is deceased, you still have to have EMS come and pronounce them dead. You call for the medical examiner. So you've already got the ball in motion. You don't want to touch anything. I mean, that's a biggie. Even sometimes just remove the person and move yourself from the scene and have crime scene come in, and then our crime scene is a crime scene unit is seasoned NYPD detectives that take blood samples and they work their magic in there. Once they leave, then the detectives come in. They start poking around and looking at things. In the meantime, you've gotten all the pertinent information off of whoever's been around, witnesses. The detectives go around the neighborhood. They start canvassing. Did this woman have any problems with anybody? And this particular homicide, we put this kid on the couch briefly and we just started asking him. We didn't put the screws to him. We're just asking him, when was the last time you saw your mother? And he went from being hysterical crying to all of a sudden he was measured and repeating our questions, buying himself some time. The detectives took him into the precinct and I was tasked with vouchering some things. The crime scene unit handed me a bunch of stuff and I was tasked with vouchering it. And in New York, the first uniform member that's on the scene is responsible for identifying the deceased the following day. So you've got to fill out this little piece of oak tag. It's called a 95 tag. It's got all my information on it. It's got the deceased information on it. You tie it around their big toe. So when the body goes to the morgue for autopsy, you have to respond the following day to identify the body. Following morning, I go down to the morgue. And New York, I mean, there's so many people that die down there, up there. And it's a funny story. There's a skeleton crew. I hand this kid a piece of paper. I says, I'm here to, identify this victim. He goes into this refrigerated room, wheels out a gurney, pulls off the sheet. It's a black guy with a beard. I said, no, Hispanic female. Throws the sheet over the black guy, pushes him into the refrigerated room, comes out with another body, flips the sheet off. It's a Spanish wino. I go, dude, I didn't come here to see everybody that got fucking killed in the Bronx last night. I'm here to see this woman. I go, let me in there. I go into this refrigerated room and it's like a horror movie. There's like 8 or 10 gurneys with dead people. Even though it's refrigerated, they still smell. I saw my handwriting on the foot, that tag. I pull the sheet off. I identify the woman. I go back to the precinct that morning. It's about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. All the detectives are high-fiving and celebrating. I'm like, well, what the fuck happened? And the night before, the guy wasn't giving it up, and he didn't ask for a lawyer, but he wanted to go home. So the detectives told him, yeah, go home, because they knew they were going to go make a run at him at 6 o'clock in the morning and pull him out of bed and try to talk to him again. When they went to the building, the young man that had stabbed his mother to death was in the hallway, and his uncles were yelling at him, what's going on? What happened to your mother? And he gave it up. And thank God the detectives spoke Spanish. They were in the hallway. They heard the conversation. And then they brought him into the station house and he repeated it. And Now, yada, yada, yada. He's in jail for 30 years. But in New York, especially, as a young cop, you learn with a crime scene, try to touch as little as possible, safeguard it. Don't let people go traipsing into the crime scene, and let the specialized units do their work.
Yeah, the contrast to that is that our department was a smaller department, and we did have detectives that would take over the case. But as an initial officer, when we showed up, we had to check for signs of life, call an ambulance, call the coroner, to get them running if we knew for sure that there were, absolute lividity and everything else would point to the fact that they're absolutely deceased. Get that ball rolling, obviously get a detective coming down, and then we had to, there were so many things that we ended up having to do before the detective even got there. And
Oh, your
then,
responsibilities are probably a lot more than ours were, because, like I said, we just got on the phone and started calling these units, and they just start showing up, and you take a step back and they tell you what to do.
yeah, it was interesting when I told you about my first call being a suicide, that once we got the coroner there and the detective there, my FTO, of course, was telling me to do this, do this, do that, do this. And then when the coroner got there, the coroner says, "Okay, come over here. I'm going to show you how to check this and how to look for lividity, how to go this, how to, touch that, how to do this." So I got like an education for the like 2 hour time period while I learned from them what to do with a dead body. And then unfortunately, seems like that followed me the rest of my career. And I had 5 suicides between Christmas Eve and Christmas Day one year. Made for a sucky Christmas. It really changes your perspective when you knock on somebody's door and they're going, "Hey, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year." And you go, "Can you please step out here for a second? And we need to talk to you." Um, so yeah, it I wanted to kind of share the perspective between a very large department and a smaller to medium department, because even though we have detectives, we had to take a more proactive approach to investigating the scene with a preliminary report and then present that to the detective, and then they would follow up with it. Um,
Well, I'll tell in New York, right? I don't know how many medical examiners are working on any given day, but I'm sure there's not more than one or two, maybe three. So when someone dies in a house or an apartment, unless it's in the street in public view, or it's a homicide where they're not going anywhere. Um, and it could, like I said, it could be an old lady that's 100 years old, dies in her apartment, or a
yeah,
suicide. You have to wait there. It's called sitting on a DOA. So once everything's been ruled, the detectives and everything, you got to wait on the medical examiner. And there's stories in my books that are funny with these medical examiners. And you can, usually the young guys get stuck with these calls, and you're sitting in an apartment or a house with someone that might have been dead for days or weeks or hours. The smell is unbearable. I learned a lot
absolutely.
of tricks, like old timers used to teach me. Like, after it was determined it wasn't suspicious death, you go
Vicks.
to the kitchen for a pot, for coffee grinds, and you pour the coffee grinds in a pot. You burn the pot on the stove, so the smell of burnt coffee grinds will permeate the house and mask the smell of a DOA. And you're sitting there with this dead person, right? And you just, you get curious. You start looking around and you're looking at the photos. I did. I'm just trying to figure out like what kind of person they were, and their family's going to miss them, or provided they even had families, some of these older
Mhm.
people. And the medical examiner, I mean, they were a fucking trip. I mean, they're usually, I mean, my experience was usually middle aged, overweight men, overworked, would show up, eating a slice of pizza, drinking a cup of coffee. Yeah, he's dead, all right. I mean, gallows humor. Yeah, you know what? Not a suspicious death. This body, you tell the family they can call a funeral home, or, yeah, you know what? We're going to want to take a look at this. I'll call the morgue wagon. And then you got to wait for those fucking guys, and they're a trip. Anybody that drives around in a van picking up dead bodies, they've got a bizarre sense of humor. But I mean, it's a whole process in New York. And I mean, as a rookie cop, we had to go to the morgue. And it wasn't like an episode of Quincy where you've got one slab and one guy in a white coat. It was like going to a Jiffy Lube or a Costco on a Sunday when they're changing tires. I mean, you've got like 8 slabs going, and they're cutting and pulling people's skulls off and weighing organs and scales. And I'm like, what the fuck? So yeah, you definitely get to see a lot. New York is the worst of the worst with some of this stuff.
Yeah, that is. I had to go to autopsies, which I didn't like. That I could never understand. One of my best friends, in fact, my FTO, in my first job in law enforcement, my FTO. We became very good friends, and he um, he ended up marrying somebody that was a coroner, female that was a coroner. It's like how her name was Chris, and it's like how can you do this? What attracted you to become a coroner? I can handle a dead body. Didn't have any issues with that. That was just kind of a there it was. It happened. You know, like you said, I never heard the coffee ground thing though. I wish I would have known that. We used to do Vicks,
Yeah.
put Vicks up here so that you just snort in Vicks. But never heard the coffee ground thing. But it's like, how the hell? Why? She said, well, I'm just fascinated by dead bodies. I went, well, keep doing that because I'm not. Nope, I'll bring them to you. You can cut them up and look at them, and we're going to leave it at that.
Yeah, that's not a job I would gravitate towards. I mean, like I said, I've been to the morgue. I've had to deal with the dead in New York. When you're that rookie cop first on the scene, you've got to search the dead for valuables, and you know how it is. Someone's dead a
Yep,
couple of days. You got to throw a sheet over them and rock the body so they'll pop, and then you get that smell. And I mean, it's just
overwhelming.
anybody that likes that is a ghoul. I can't. I'm not talking about a medical examiner, but I mean, there were cops running around with cameras, fucking taking photos and shit, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to. I saw it once.
Nope.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Why do I want to? It's not my
yeah.
daughter's wedding. You know what I mean? Like, why would I want a photo of this?
Nope, nope, nope. Not for me. Not for me. We had a guy that was, unfortunately, he was dead for 2 weeks. Had fallen, hit his head, died, and it was winter. So the heat in the house, he was probably 80, I think it was 80, 81 years old. He had turned the heat up to 90 degrees in his house. So he sat in, it was completely closed up. And yeah, it was not pretty. That actually was my last death before I retired. Was that one. And it's like, yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that going away present, we'll call it.
You'll never forget that smell. You
No,
just, it's one of those things. It's unmistakable. You
it
know what I
doesn't go
mean?
away.
Yeah.
Yep, doesn't go away. Doesn't go away. Let's look at the lighter side. I know we're going over just a little bit here, but if you got a few more minutes,
Sure.
um, cops have a great sense of humor. Don't you agree?
Oh, yeah. Oh, the shit that used to go on in the station house. I like to tell the story when I was a detective. I'm sitting in the office, and when you're a detective and you're working with 20, 30 detectives in an office, you got 20 pairs of trained eyes watching your every move. They don't fucking miss a trick. I had a date. I changed my clothes because, getting out in a couple of minutes, I was going to go out. I go to make myself a cup of coffee. One of them soaks my chair with ice water. I got a wet ass. I go upstairs. I change my clothes. I go back downstairs. Across the street from our office was a pet store. I bought a bag of about 100 crickets that people use to feed lizards. I got a Slim Jim. I went into the parking lot. This is when you work in auto crime. I opened up the guy's car. I popped open the bag and I poured the crickets in the back seat of his car. And, he got in the car to drive home, scared the shit out of him, slammed on the brakes, got fucking locusts bouncing around his head. Guy wound up having to sell the car. Like he roach bombed it a couple of times, but those things keep fucking breeding. I mean, it was a shitbox car, but still, he had to wind up selling it. So guys are always pulling pranks and practical jokes on each other. You tend not to. Rookies are the worst. They're the cruelest to each other. It's like kids at a schoolyard. There was a guy. He was older. He got hired. Like you had a bunch of rookies in their early 20s, and then you had this one guy that was like 30. He really didn't have anything in common with these kids, and he was socially awkward. And this is the early 90s when Rogaine first came out. And the guy made the mistake of leaving a bottle of Rogaine in his locker with the locker open. So the guys got a hold of his Rogaine bottle. They poured the contents in another container, and then they filled it up with varnish.
Oh, jeez.
So then the guy goes and fucking shellacks the top of his head, and he had to be restrained. Like he lost his fucking mind for a couple of minutes. Like they
Jeez.
had to really like calm him down. So yeah, there's always fucking around going in the station house. And you're right, cops do have a bizarre sense of humor. One of the funniest one-liners I heard was early 90s, and you had these kids that were wilding in packs and beating up homeless people and shit, and it was around Halloween, and a gang of kids the night before had beaten up this homeless guy and cut his ear off. So they're like,
Shit.
be careful with these kids with razor blades. They sliced off the ear of a homeless guy up on, whatever by the park. And this old timer sitting next to me goes, I hope that motherfucker didn't wear glasses. And I mean, I almost fell out of the chair. You know what I mean? It's cops just have those one liners, you know what I mean? And we didn't rehearse it. I mean, how often does someone get their ear sliced off? So it wasn't like an old joke passed down to generation. Cops are quite witty.
Well, I will put a disclaimer in here. When you deal with the kind of people that we deal with, the situations that we deal with death. We deal with the best people at their worst and the worst people at their worst. You have to have a sense of humor. It kind of protects us.
Oh yeah, and it's funny because you run into different in New York, you run into cops that work in different places that had different problems or different interactions. So I can't give up names, but I knew a lot of guys when I worked in narcotics. I knew a lot of cops that worked in the Hollywood precincts, in the Upper East Side, Upper West Side of Manhattan. So they were always running into famous people. And a story a guy told me, and I can't say the names because I don't know it to be true, but he tells the story of one day there's this cab driver screaming and blowing the horn at the police. So they stop, and there's a very famous actor in the back seat of the cab, passed out drunk, carrying, just drunk out of his mind. And he got into an argument with the cab driver and fell asleep. So they're like, holy shit, this is so and so. So they get him out of the cab, and he's, just out of it. So they start going through his pockets, and they find the phone number to another famous actor. So like, holy shit, like, what are the odds of this? I've got this guy's phone number. So they call this other famous actor, and he says, listen, we got your buddy here. He's drunk. Can we bring him over your place? He goes, oh God, no, I don't want that fucking drunk in my house. He goes, take him to a hotel, and he hangs up. So they bring this famous actor to a hotel, and there was a couple of hotels in Manhattan that specialized in this sort of thing. So they brought him up to this hotel, famous hotel, and they go, hi, and they're like, oh, yeah. He's been here before. Yeah. And they have the bellhop. So the cops in the bellhop get in an elevator with this guy, and he was a large man. And there was this attractive female cop in the elevator, and they said, like, the guy's drunk, and he's standing against the elevator, and all of a sudden he's like, coming to, and he sees like the attractive female cop, and he's like, hey, do you know who I am? Maybe we should get a drink. And she's like, get the fuck out of here. And they brought him up to his room, and he slept it off, and that was the end of it. But you do hear these wild stories. This story I can tell. We had this thing with stolen motorcycles in Lower Manhattan. So I was in auto crime. They put us with these plainclothes cops from the first precinct in Lower Manhattan to see if we can pick off these motorcycle thieves. So while we're down there, this Manhattan cop tells me this story, and it was wild. He said that, I don't know this to be true, but I mean, why would this guy make it up? He said Harvey Keitel lived in Tribeca, and Harvey Keitel was a great guy. And from time to time, when he was researching a part for a movie, or Harvey Keitel would stop at the precinct and be cops out front, and he would go, hey, you guys mind if I ride around the back seat for a while? Now, you're not allowed to do that, but who the fuck is going to tell Harvey Keitel no?
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't. Harvey Keitel gets in the car, and he's answering calls with them. They're going around with Harvey Keitel for the night. And the cop told me, he goes, one time they're in an apartment on a domestic violence or a domestic fight or whatever. And this couple is screaming at each other, and the cops are trying to break them apart. And all of a sudden, the husband looks over and goes, what the fuck is Harvey Keitel doing here? So it kind of like totally diffused the system. Now the guy wants his autograph and agreed to behave. And they said like Harvey Keitel was mysterious. Like he would ride around for a while and go, guys, I got to get back. You mind dropping me off at the station? They're like, sure, Mr. Keitel. Like, who's going to tell Winston Wolfe from Pulp Fiction no? Like,
Yeah,
that would,
exactly.
so you get to hear things from different guys and girls about what goes on in different places.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. My celebrity story with that is I got to drive Daryl Hannah around.
Oh wow!
A little bit, yeah. They said you showed up at the precinct. They wanted to go check out. I don't know if you know anything about Colorado Springs, but they've got a park out there called Garden of the Gods, and it's a beautiful park. It is alleged to be from the Native Americans. It's supposed to be spiritual, and it's got these huge red rocks everywhere. It's beautiful. It was just beautiful. And she wanted to go out there and watch the bears, literally the bears. And she said, "Can we'd like to know if you want to take her out?" I'm the sergeant, right? So I I threw myself on the sword, and I said, "Well, I'm the sergeant. I'll be glad to take you out there to watch the bears." So we sat out in the park watching the bears. It was fun. It was good.
What year was this?
That would be 1997, 98.
Okay. Yeah, she's very attractive woman, tall. From what?
Very, yes, very, very nice lady. We talked. We just had. I didn't know what to say to her. To be honest, it
I
was
know.
like I didn't want to really go fan, drooling all over her. But it was kind of like I tried to have a conversation with her, like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And she said, "Well, we're doing a documentary." And so I kind of edged that conversation a little bit more. And we drove around to 2 or 3 different places looking for bears. And when we found some bears, a mama and her 2 cubs that were up in trees, she said, "Oh, stop here, stop here. Can you put the spotlight up there?" And I did everything she wanted to do. Then pretty soon she said, "Well, okay, I saw enough. Can you take me back?" And I took her back, and it was like just as they got there, my wife and kids showed up to the department, and they missed her as she was leaving. But
Oh,
it was like holy shit! I met Daryl Hannah. It was yeah, it had to be 97 or 98. It was good. It was pretty fun. I loved it. And then I met Reba McIntyre, and I did security for her. And she said, looked at me and said, "You're too skinny." And I said, "What?" She said, "You're too skinny." And she gave me half her sandwich
that's
and said,
nice
"Here,
of
eat.
her.
Yeah, here, eat this."
That's funny.
So yeah, those are my 2 celebrity stories. I had
There's a
fun.
chapter in one of my books. I think it's the NYPD's Flying Circus. There's a chapter called "Rubbing Elbows," and it's about. I've met countless famous people in New York, and there's a couple of funny stories in there. Running into Kevin Bacon, John Lovitz. John Lovitz was a great guy. Brad Garrett from Everybody Loves Raymond, great guy. Just, I mean,
Sounds
down
like
to
it.
earth. Yeah, just couldn't have been nicer, appreciative. John Lovitz wanted to get an autograph for his daughter at the U.S. Open, and I saw him standing there, and I started breaking his balls because he was doing the Subway commercials. So I'm going, "Eat fresh," and then I'm doing when he was in Seinfeld, "Good for you, Jack," and I'm busting his balls, and he goes, "Oh, wise ass." He goes, "Maybe you could do me a favor," and I go, "What's up?" He goes, "I want to get an autograph for my daughter or some tennis player." I go, "Hang out." I go into the locker room because it was towards the end of the U.S. Open, and really cool tennis player. I can't think of the guy's name. Wasn't really famous, but I went up to him. I go, "Hey, you got a second?" He goes, "What's up?" I go, "You watch Saturday Night Live?" He goes, "Yeah." I go, "Do you remember John Lovitz?" He goes, "Yeah." I go, "He's outside. He wants your autograph." He goes, "Get the fuck out of here." He thought I was pulling his leg. I
He
go,
goes,
"No, he's out there now." There's a couple of cops drinking coffee with him. Came out, and Lovitz was taking photos with us. Like, couldn't have been nicer.
"Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant." And he hasn't changed. If you look, I saw him the other day on television in some game show, and he looks like he hasn't aged a bit. Actually, funny as
He
hell
does
guy.
look the same. That's funny you should say that. He does. Yeah, he does look the same.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I Well, let's tell everybody about the rest of your books before I choke to death. Let's talk to. I think you got 6 books out, and you can get them on Amazon. And tell us about them, please, and how they can get them.
Sure. So NYPD Through the Looking Glass, stories from inside America's largest police department. That's a behind the scenes look at the NYPD. Grand Theft Auto, the NYPD's auto crime division. That's everything you wanted to know about the stolen car industry, who steals your car, where your car goes, what happens in a chop shop. And there's also stories about how to protect your car. The NYPD's Flying Circus, Cops, Crime, and Chaos. There's a ton of funny stories in there, including a cop that I knew that stole a horse and carriage for a wild ride through Central Park. NYPD Law and Disorder opens up with a story called Embarrassing Moments. I'm in uniform. This is a true story. I had to use a public restroom in emergency. I hang my gun belt on the hook. I drop my pants. I'm getting ready for liftoff, and a bunch of teenagers run into the next stall and try pulling my gun belt over the wall. I got into a hockey fight with this kid playing tug of war with him. P.S. I kept my gun. Um, Confessions of a Catholic high school graduate is about, there's a picture of an altar boy, not an altar boy, but a kid in a Catholic high school uniform getting chased out of a church by a priest. That happened to me. Confessing one too many sins can lead to a foot chase. And Dickheads and Debauchery and Other Ingenious Ways to Die is an politically incorrect guide to how to live longer. All my books, they're paperback, they're $10 or $2.99 ebook download, and they're all available on Amazon. So just go to Amazon and type in my name, Vic, VIC, Ferrari like the car, and you can read 20% of my books for free to preview them.
That's fantastic. And I'll make sure that the link to the website is available to everybody. So you can just follow the link. It'll be in the show notes. And it'll make it easy for everyone so that they can easily get those books. This has been a fantastic conversation, Vic. I am ecstatic that we were able to connect. And thank you very much for your service with the NYPD. And I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your experience with us today.
Michael, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I will make sure that we need to do this again sometime and maybe expand on
Oh, absolutely.
some more things. I think we can have a really fun conversation. If I don't die first.
You'll be fine.
So thank you very much, everybody. Please be sure to look at the show notes, follow the Amazon link to find Vic's books, and I look forward to seeing you the next time. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go. Check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.